Okay, good morning, everybody. I almost said afternoon because I'm that confused this morning, so stick with me. Welcome to the People Committee of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. I'm Mary Wiley, I'm the chair for the committee. Just a couple of things to note. Welcome, Andy. It's your first meeting in your new role, so congratulations, and hopefully you will enjoy the committee today, I'm sure, but we all wish you well. In addition to that, can I just welcome everybody else, but also to remind you, can you keep your microphones on mute and to use the hand raising function if you would like to come in. Hopefully that's okay with everybody. We're pretty routine with these things by now. If we can, then I'd like to progress on in terms of apologies for absence. I'm not aware of any.
No apologies, Chair, thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the items being proposed to be taken in private, are we content with the proposal as outlined in the minute? Are there any items that you feel should be taken in private and are not? None. Okay, if we're content with that, then we can move on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? None. Thank you very much, everyone. In that case, we'll move on to item 5, which is the minutes of the previous meeting from the 3rd of March. If we go through them, they start on page 4 of the document pack. Is there anything to note? Page 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's quite a long meeting. Everybody's content then with the accuracy of the minutes? Excellent, thank you very much. In which case, if we move on to the action log, and that's with you, Ali, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Ali Cameron, Board Support Manager. So just referring to page 13 of the pack, the People Committee Rolling Action Log, the committee will see that we've got 4 actions in total, 3 of which have been marked blue as completed, and 1 which has been identified as green, so no identified risk and it's on target for completion. So just to confirm, the committee are content with the position statement updates. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ali. And just in terms of the item that's marked green, we are progressing that. And we had I had a quick catch up with Andy earlier last week, and we're just hoping to be able to incorporate some of Andy's responses and hopefully circulate something out further to everybody at that point as well. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll have something progressed out to everybody. Are there any comments on the action log? Questions? Nope. Good stuff. In which case, can we move on to the value added statement? So that is item 7. Some of you have already seen this because it has already gone to RANSC. Are there any questions or comments, queries, suggestions? None at all. Is everybody content with the proposed statement? Yes. Excellent. At this rate, will be done rather rapidly. Okay, if we can move on then actually to number 8, that's the Employee Partnership Forum Revised Terms of Reference. Steve, do you want to introduce this item?
Thanks, thanks, Mary. Very briefly. So Steve Barron, Non-Executive Director and Vice Chair of this committee. Just to say that the employee terms of reference were considered by the Employee Partnership Forum at its meeting last month. And were approved by them. The next stage in the process is for us to get comfortable with them and then to recommend them to the board. My thanks to Ali and to Richard particularly for the help that I had in realigning them with current situation. I would say that almost all of the changes are procedural and recognition of different terms. So, for instance, we're referring to rep bodies now rather than trade union representatives and the like. The one change that I think perhaps worth just bringing to your attention so that you consider it fully is that the revision says that it is no longer the case that the chair of the Employee Partnership Forum will rotate. It says that the chair will be a non-executive member of the board, and that if I, as chair, am not available for that, then another non-executive, in this case likely to be Mary, would step in and chair the forum. Now, my rationale for that in explaining it to the forum is that, in my experience, it's quite difficult for a chair to get involved in a debate in a way that can be strong in opinion and perhaps take a firm position on something, because I think the role of the chair is to make sure that everyone's voice is heard and to try to reach consensus at the end of a discussion. So my suggestion to the forum was that that's easier for someone for a non-exec to do than it is for a representative of, let's say, the Fire Brigade Union, for instance. Now, people nodded to that, and we agreed that we would run that way for a year, and at the end of the year we would review it again. So I was quite pleased at that, because it obviously there are privileges in being the chair in terms of shaping the agenda and the order that you bring people in, but I am honestly of the view that it will be easier for the rep bodies to make their points as members of the forum rather than as a chair of the committee. So I'm asking People Committee to accept the changes that are set out in the paper and then take them forward to the board as a recommendation of ours. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Can I also prompt, are we also considering the possibility of adding in the power to create short life working groups as well? Because I don't think that's detailed in the current draft. Perhaps yourself or Ali can keep me correct on that, though.
I'd be grateful, Ali, if you could give the committee the advice you gave me.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Steve. Yes, just in relation to that, and consistent with the terms of reference for committees, despite this being a forum, just to align it to that also was to suggest that under rights, section 5, that we put in the ability for the committee to hold private workshop sessions as required for development purposes in order to accommodate organisational input and support. So just to confirm, the committee would be content with that. In terms of short life working groups, that in itself would, by all intents and purposes, require potentially a little bit more resource and input into that. So just again to have that, so that for instances of that nature, that it would be a case of coming back to the committee just to confirm that they're content for the purposes of those type of events, and on that basis as well, if that is the proposal, that the committee are content for that to take place. Steve, I see you have your hand raised. Thank you.
Just to say, Chair, that I will come back to that under item 14 on the agenda when I give my report on the discussions that took place at the forum. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. So can I take the in two parts, if that's okay? Oh, Malcolm, come in.
Thanks. It's on a different issue. It's a minor thing. Do you want me to come in now?
If you can hold off on that just 2 seconds, Malcolm, because can I check, is everybody content to add those rights on to the document that's in front of you? Are there any concerns specifically on that addition? None. Everybody's content with that. So then if we can consider the document as a whole with those additions in it, then Malcolm, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Malcolm Payton, board member. It's a very minor thing. Just in paragraph 7.2, it says, in the absence of the chair, ... the chair will seek an alternative temporary chair. I understand exactly what you're saying there, and it's absolutely correct. Just the wording sounds a bit strange because it says in the absence of the chair will seek. So I just wonder if there's a slightly better way of wording that. I mean, as I say, I totally agree with the sentiment. I'm very happy with the paper on the whole and the amendments, the direction that's going. So I wonder if that's worth a glance before we take it to the board. That's all.
Malcolm, would you be happy with that being left with board support to have a look at?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, Steve?
I'm happy with that too, Mary.
Any other questions, comments, queries? In which case, I think if we're content with those changes, we can move on. Thank you very much. Okie dokie. We're now on to our performance and risk report for Q4. So we're on to the pod report first and foremost. And just before I bring it, I think it'll be Lindsay coming in on this item unless Liz is doing it. I just want to say again that I'm finding the executive summary really, really useful. I really do appreciate that, Lindsay. Thank you. and I can see from the nods of heads that everybody else is too. So I'll hand over to yourself, and no doubt that we will have questions afterwards.
Thanks very much, Mary. Lindsay Gaia, Head of People and Organisational Development. As Mary noted, we've continued with the executive summary, which we introduced at the last committee meeting. So I'll highlight the elements that we've drawn out within the exec summary, and then I'm happy to take questions on that or any other aspect of the report. The first area that we've highlighted is the changes that have happened recently to the arrangements for the firefighter pension scheme and the impact that that has had on the service's retirement profile for uniformed colleagues. We are experiencing and will continue to experience a significant increase in the number of leavers through retirement over and above our normal business as usual forecasts, and in response to that, a staffing tactical action group has been stood up with representation from across the service and a staffing solutions team to work on delivery of the actions that are agreed through the staffing tag. There is a further agenda item later on in today's committee meeting to provide a fuller update on the work of the staffing tag, so I'll be able to provide some more insight, as will other members of the committee at that point. The second area that we've highlighted within the executive summary are some of the ongoing recruitment challenges that the service, like many other employers, is continuing to experience. Both our vacancy rate and the time anecdotally that it's taking us to fill vacancies are increasing. We saw in the last quarter a particularly significant increase in the vacancy rate within operations control, although I would draw to the committee's attention the fact that there was a new intake of trainees into operations control of 15 individuals, which has gone some way to addressing that shortfall versus the target operating model for OC. And the final area that we've drawn out for particular attention within the executive summary is the absence rate. We did see a decrease in our long-term absence rate, which is very positive, showing the successful management of some long-term absences from work. We did, however, see an increase from 2.39 to 3.6% in our short-term absence rate. That was, for the most part, driven by absences related to COVID-19. During that quarter, with the number of days lost more than doubling, and that was the highest level of COVID-related absence since the beginning of the pandemic. To provide some comfort to the committee, I am able to confirm that our absence rate has returned there or thereabouts to pre-pandemic levels since the government guidance around self-isolation and testing came to an end. So we are certainly seeing a significant improvement in attendance rates following those changes. Those were the three main areas that we've highlighted within the executive summary, although of course I'm happy to take questions on any other elements of the report that have caught the committee's attention.
Thank you, Lindsay. I know I have some questions myself, but I would like to open up if there's any other comments or questions from anyone else. No. You might have achieved the first, Lindsay, well done. So I do have, though, I'm afraid, a couple of questions myself. I'll ask you them all and you can take them all after. But the Staffing Tactical Action Group, how early in its planning processes will it start to be able to take account of the spending review implications as well? I mean, bearing in mind that the organisation will still be grappling with the long-term vision of that too, but will that start to kind of come on board quite soon? There's an element in terms of, I think it would be useful, and it's possibly an off the table discussion and or circulation of information, to understand what the attrition rate is to some extent outside of the retirements, and I'll come back to an element that I think relates to the OC, or some not growing concerns, but an awareness of some of the risks associated around OC in particular, but it's not restricted to just that. It's just that we've got some reasonably good indications in terms of retirement figures, but it's not just the recruitment of staff, it's also our ongoing retention of staff as well. I think that would be interesting for us to explore a little bit. And then the other one was, it was just actually to encourage perhaps a little bit of a reflection from yourself, and it's in relation to 2.1.2, and in that item in particular, there's a mention of in terms of breaches of codes of conduct being a particular reason for disciplinary cases, and it mentions criminal convictions specifically, Lindsay, and I'm conscious that we're going through the PVG process within the staff team. I'm just wondering, is there any correlation between those two, or are these other sorts of convictions that are coming up, or that the service is being made aware of separately? That's on page 7 of the report, or page 42 of the paper pack, if that makes any sense, Lindsay. That was all I had, I think.
Thanks very much, Mary. I'm just finding it's 2.1.2, is that right?
2.1.2. I'll give you a
Yeah,
second
I've
and bring in
got it
Stuart, Lindsay, just to give you a second to have a look at that. Well done, Stuart. That was indeed.
Thanks, Mary. You're welcome, Lindsay. Stuart Stevens, Assistant Chief Officer and Director of Service Delivery. Perhaps I could just pick up that first question, Mary, in terms of the resource spending review. So there's quite a considerable piece of work being commissioned by SLT, which is ongoing at the moment, to understand the implications of SLT, and all the directors are off developing what our responses would be to the resource spending review. In terms of your exact question around about, is it in the mindset of staffing target at the moment? Yes, it is. However, there's no direct outcomes linked to that or actions linked to that at the moment, but it's definitely in my mind as the chair of the staffing target at the moment.
Thanks, Stuart. That's great. Lindsay, if I come back to yourself, and then I'll bring Stephen.
Thank you very much. In terms of the attrition rate, we can certainly provide some insight to the committee and split out the levers by reason, to separate out retirements from colleagues who are leaving for other reasons. And if the committee's content, I would propose that I take that away as an action to come back with some further insight, if that's okay. And in terms of 2.1.2, as the report notes, we have had a number of cases over the last quarter or so which are connected to criminal convictions and proceedings out with the employment environment. There has also been a significant amount of work across the service around the dignity and respect at work policy and procedure that have been reviewed and promoted. The business partnering team have been running a number of sessions with local management teams to raise awareness around code of conduct and professional behaviours. And my suspicion would be that that has heightened awareness and the confidence and competence of managers to address the types of conduct issues that are referenced here. So my interpretation and my take on the figures would be that it's less a massive increase in instances of misconduct and more an increased focus on addressing those in the appropriate way and making sure that everybody's clear on the standards of professional behaviour that we expect within the service.
Thanks, Lindsay. That makes sense. Steve?
Thanks, Mary. In some ways, I'm just reinforcing stuff that's already been said, but one or two pieces maybe. I think the paper's fantastic. It's very well presented, contains exactly the right information, and it's presented in a way that helps non-execs, I think, to focus on the things that are important. So well done, everybody that's been involved in that. It's clear that most of the results are good or better. And one thing I wanted to highlight was that the RDS vacancies and the VDS vacancies remain high. Now, we know this and we've heard the reasons for this in the past, so I'm not raising this as a new issue, but on the one hand, well done for keeping the service operational in these circumstances, because these are very high rates, but also it would be good to hear in a future meeting perhaps about when these will be returning back to what we would consider to be business as usual levels, such that we can take comfort that risk is lessened. And finally from me, and again, this is not something that that's the first time it's been said, but if you look at section 2, which says support, promote and monitor the development of a diverse workforce and inclusive culture aligned with SFRS values. And then you look at the 3 measures that we're promoting to help us to understand whether we're achieving that. These aren't aligned. And I know that's not really for this meeting, but it is important to note that for future meetings, we need to see closer alignment with the measures and the objective. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. In relation to the RVDS elements, I suppose, well, RDS in particular, Stuart will pick aspects of that up, I suspect, at a later item on the agenda. But I do think that there will be sufficient interest, Stuart, after that item on the agenda today, for us to continue to receive some form of assurance of hopefully a more optimistic picture going forward, or the rationale to some extent as to where we're at and how we're going to be taking that forward. But I'm sure you will pick some of that up when we get to that item on the agenda.
Indeed.
Okay. Lindsay.
Thank you very much for the feedback on the report. We'll make sure that's passed on to the team, because it's a huge collective effort to put this together, and many people are involved. I do take on board your point, Steve, on section 2, and I'd be keen, as we work through the workshops on the format of the report to committee in future, that we can take some soundings from committee on the measures that you'd like to see to reflect that particular performance measure.
Thanks, Lindsay. If there are no more questions or comments from the committee, in which case, can I just echo Steve's thanks as well for the report. It was very comprehensive, and in actual fact, I think that's evident from the fact that you've not got a ongoing series of slew of questions. So obviously it just hit the nail on the head. So thank you very much for that, and to everybody as well behind that report as well, Lindsay, as you've rightly said. If we can, then we'll move on to the training, safety and assurance report. Now, Andy, I don't know if you want to introduce the item, or if we'll start off with Jim.
Thanks, Chair. Andy Watt, Assistant Chief Officer, Training, Safety and Assurance. Yeah, I'm happy to bring in Bruce, first of all, just to go through the training analysis of the report, if that's okay, Chair.
Please. Hi, Bruce.
Good morning, everybody. Bruce Farquharson, Head of Training. The report is there, and I'm going on the assumption that it's been read by everybody. I will just draw your attention to a few key points. So there's been a number of successes for the training function in the last quarter. The two that I'd like to draw your attention to in particular are the number of whole-time trainee firefighters that completed the new foundation training programme, and that's using the new delivery model of 4 days and then another 4 days, so 2 courses running back to back at the same time. We've also had the following the review of the Training for Operational Competence framework, the new TFOC went live in April, and that's been well received and allows us to be much more agile and focused and targeted in the training that we deliver across our LCMS packages through the TFOC. I would like also to just identify that there's 3 points that I think need a little bit more clarification. So on page 61 of the report, we're showing a drop in the number of FDOs who have completed the TFOC modules that I just mentioned. There's a context behind that. So every time we promote somebody new into our Flexi Duty Officer cadre, unless they get promoted on the very first day of April, they're always going to be behind the curve in relation to the number of modules that they complete. So the churn that we see in our Flexi Duty Officer cadre results in the numbers of completed modules being skewed slightly. So if somebody's promoted in the 6th month, for example, they will only ever be able to achieve 50% in that reporting year. Also on page 64 and 65, we're showing that we've delivered more than 100% in relation to water rescue and mass decontamination. The context behind that is that the numbers required for those attributes to be deployed operationally were reviewed, and as a result of that review, we have trained more people than is now required. So it's not that we've been hyper efficient and delivered training to more people than actually exist. It's just that the numbers that are required has been altered. The final piece of clarification I'd like to offer before I just highlight on some of the work that's coming up is on page 68 of the report, where we show the volunteer duty system personnel having only achieved 1 of the advanced modules. It's just to give some assurance around about that it's actually the 12 standard modules that are the important measure. So the 12 standard modules reflect training for competence. The advanced modules are over and above that, and our VDS personnel, our volunteers, have a reduced set of incidents that they will get mobilised to, predominantly road traffic collisions and wildfires. So the advanced modules are not as applicable to that group of people, and actually the fact that they have done one is over and above the expectation of that group of personnel. Finally, just to highlight some of the future work that's coming up that you can expect to see reports on. We've done some initial scoping out and thinking about how we train our command groups, our flexi-duty officer command groups. And we're looking to put in place a structured programme that will mandate ongoing training, as opposed to the approach that's taken just now, where incident commanders at that level receive on a 3 to 5 year basis a one-off refresher and assessment. So we're going to smooth that out and have an ongoing drip feeding of that ongoing learning and CPD to help assist our incident commanders throughout that 3 to 5 year basis. And I'll stop there, Chair, and happily take any questions that anybody has.
Thank you, Bruce. That was very helpful. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I feel like I'm the only person who's had questions today, and I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad sign, to be honest. I only had a couple of small questions, sorry, on page 55 of the paper pack, 6 of the report itself. It's just talking about the ICT senior management, and you were hoping that that risk would have reduced in Q1, and it was just to say, is there any verbal update in terms of, are you optimistic that by the end of June that will have trended down? And I'm happy if you don't have the information in front of you just now to say so. Andy, do you want to, Bruce?
I was just going to deflect that immediately to Jim Holden as a health and safety issue.
That's fine. Oh, sorry. Andy, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, that sits with Jim. So in terms of health and safety and bringing in the system, so we're still liaising and engaging with the IT department on that, and those actions have rolled across into the new annual operating plan. So we've got clearly defined key milestones this year for delivery, and we'll continue to work with our ICT partners for those deliverables across the year.
No, that's fine. Sorry, Andy, I'm jumping the gun, getting myself a little bit confused using papers. In which case, that seems like a good opening, if nobody else has any training questions, to go to. Oh, sorry, Malcolm.
Sorry, thanks. We'll just come in with a brief one then, since we're going through rapidly. Just one, I noted at one point, I can't quite find the page at the moment, but it says some 3 incidents, I think it was faulty gates or doors. I presume that's our gates and doors rather than public ones, so to speak. And again, I suppose it's a point I've kind of mentioned before. Is there more we can do about the low-hanging fruit, so to speak? I mean, some of that, it seems to me, should be, you know, we deal with really dangerous, difficult situations, and people are managing risk in complex scenarios that you know I've never been in. But some of these, like faulty gates or doors, you know, is there more we can do just to emphasise people the importance of some of that stuff that we should be able to? Maybe it's people rushing out too quickly or whatever, and what can we do about managing some of that low-level stuff, if that makes sense?
So, Malcolm, you and I are in the same boat today. I think that we are heading them with health and safety questions prior to Jim's report. So what I'd suggest is if we head over to, no, it's me as well. If we head over to Jim and allow you to bring that in and maybe pick up Malcolm's point as well at the same time. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Chair. Jim Holden, Head of Safety and Assurance. It would be my intention just today to run through the sort of key performance indicators, if that's okay. In terms of our annual improvement plan, at the end of Q4, we showed a good increase again of 12% to 71% completion across the board. The dips in that were in relation to some very specific actions within the SDA plans in relation to SDA handbooks, which are subsequently included in this year's plan and are making a bit of progress now. So despite the fact that they dropped off a little bit in Q4, we're picking them up again now and gaining a bit of traction. Excuse me. In relation to accident injuries, again seeing a reduction, and that's of 18%, but more significantly is the reduction in RID or reportable events by 40%, down to 9 for the quarter, which is a positive trend. over the 3-year period, again, the trends are positive and a downward slant towards accident injuries and RIDDORs, so maintaining and improving quarter to quarter, year to year overall, so positive news on that. In relation to the types of stages and types of events where incidents are taking place, operational incidents continues to be one of the key areas in primary fires. That ends at primary fires, one of the most common times when we're seeing injuries reported. There was a downward trend as well in relation to training injuries. You may have noted within the report that the National Training Centre recorded a significant increase, but this is directly linked to the training courses being reinvigorated following COVID, so the number of courses have run and the number of accident injuries still remains quite low, but we're obviously starting to train again, so we will see those picking up a little bit. In relation to the types of events, injuries relating to CFBT and musculoskeletal can continue to be an issue in the training environment. We have an action plan in place for CFBT, which has been progressed with ourselves in the training function. And in terms of musculoskeletal injuries, the health and wellbeing team has reinvigorated the MSK group, and they're looking specifically at issues, and there's a campaign that's been arranged for August in relation to that as well. Moving through to look at absence. Again, pleasing to note that the longer term absence is reducing and remains very low. So that's an indicator of the types of injuries that are being sustained, and so not many are causing long-term injuries, and those ones tend to be on specific sort of, again, MSK injuries, which may take a little bit longer to heal, but no specified injuries as such. Yeah, you mentioned, Malcolm, the causations and again impact with moving objects in relation to equipment falling out of appliances, gates, doors, all things that are avoidable, and there is guidance out there on that. To be perfectly honest, the majority of those are down to situational awareness rather than an issue with the equipment. We have issued further instruction around the storage of equipment within appliances, which will help around that, but we have done what we can in terms of people walking into doors and gates, and you know, it's a case of raising awareness and situational awareness really more than anything else. Sorry, just getting my notes here. Near misses, we see a downward trend again in near misses, which although we report numerically in a downward trend, has that been a positive indicator? Because we're seeing less near misses happening. The ratio gives us cause for concern in terms of the number of near misses reported in relation to RIDDOR reportable events, which is below, it's 0.79 to 1 as reported in the report, which is considerably lower than what we would like to see, and that is despite some promotional campaigns around near misses and fact sheets being issued. So I think we need to look at more ways to try and promote the near miss reporting, and one of the things that we are working on at present is a hazard reporting option, so an anonymous hazard reporting option. So aside from the near misses, to try and get ahead of the game and be more proactive to report those and react to those prior to events occurring. In terms of trends within the near misses, we had a number of leaks to BA sets, mostly around kind of hoses, and there's an indication that some of the stowage issues that we've had previously might be raising their heads a little bit again. So we've set up a working group to look specifically at issues around breathing apparatus, stowage and any leaks, and we've sought external advice on the causations on that as well. So hopefully that will move forward soon. Moving on to acts of violence, again, concerningly, an increasing trend noted. There was initial thoughts that this might be related to the pandemic and lockdown and things like that having an impact on individuals. However, that trend has continued during Q4 when things have started to go back to nearer normal. So we're again investigating ways to address those concerns, and there have been various partnership arrangements made within service delivery areas, and we're looking now to promote that on a national level and to seek to work with partners. There was a pledge arranged in one of our areas that worked with the local authority, the ambulance service, the NHS and some other organisations which set out requirements and did a fair amount of promotion, which seemed to have a degree of success in terms of at least raising awareness and that zero tolerance of acts of violence towards our personnel. Finally, vehicle accidents. Again, there's probably nothing new from our previous reports. We're still seeing a number of slow speed manoeuvres, vehicles hitting fixed or stationary objects. In relation to our actions to that, the driver safety group is looking to collate the approaches that have been taken in some areas again. So we've seen some success in relation to that in the North SDA. So we're looking to see how we can mirror that across the whole service, and if there's ways to approach that which will see a reduction. But that's one of our major challenges moving forward. What we also have done is published the interactive low speed manoeuvre module, which is part of the training for operational competence in Q1, which goes through a case study and is quite hard hitting in relation to the potential harm that can be caused by these types of events. So it focuses in on a case study where someone was actually hit by a vehicle, not one of ours, but the subsequent prosecutions and issues that came from that, as a way to just try to drive home the importance of using vehicle marshals, etc. As always, the report that goes out to our business partners has a number of actions that are related to these statistics, and those will be progressed through our safety and assurance improvement groups. Apologies if that was slightly longer than required, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jim. As seems to be the trend today, I know that I have a couple of questions, but I will see if anybody else has any questions first. Anything at all for Jim? Paul?
First of all, I think it's a really good report, and it's a tribute to your department. That's good. So I've got 3 small points which I'd like to just raise. Am I right in reading this that there were no riddles in the last quarter of the last year?
Yes, that's correct.
Ones.
Yes, that's correct, Paul.
That's incredible. That's really, really good. And I think that deserves to be sort of headlined. Riddles are the ones that really matter as far as I'm concerned. And if we are achieving a 0 riddle, that's the target to try and be aiming for. And that's tremendous. So congratulations on that. Couple of other small things. When you talk about acts of violence, maybe I missed it, but there isn't a breakdown within your report about what form that violence takes. And I'd be interested to know, or maybe you give me a impression, how much of it is physical and how much of it is verbal?
Yeah, we do have that breakdown. I don't think it's in this report, Paul, but it's the majority would be verbal, but the physical aspects would be the throwing of objects or fireworks, etc. So that's kind of the mix that we have, which is around 50-50 between those two. Often the types of incidents that these occur at are where secondary fires have been lit for that purpose, and groups of youths are awaiting their arrival to then either verbally or throw objects at the crews.
I just wondered if that was the case, because it then made me think that maybe we're not seeing a dramatically rise in this, but things before which were verbal abuse, which were not being recorded, might now be being better recorded, and that gives us an apparent increase. Now, maybe I'm an optimist, but I just think maybe your recording is better rather than the actual level of abuse is higher. If it was physical acts of violence, I would be very concerned to see this increase. And it's not good on verbal, but you see the point I'm trying to make, and I just wonder if that's the case.
Yeah, I think it very well could be, Paul. We've done a lot to promote the reporting of these types of incidents, and although the breakdown of it remains pretty consistent in terms of those objects thrown and the verbal elements, I think that we have come away to encourage the reporting of any type of act of violence towards our staff.
Which is good. You want people to report it, but it means we don't actually have to be quite as worried as we would be. And that's what I was trying to seek the reassurance of. The third point, if I might, is on this low-level manoeuvres of vehicles, which seems to come up at every single one. And I just wanted to ask a question about this. As part of basic training for a new firefighter, are they, or at least when they do the driving training, are they trained in how to be what I would call a banksman and how to use a banksman? Is that actually part of their training?
Yeah, maybe I could call on Bruce or Andy to answer that.
I'm happy to go first. Yes is the short answer, Paul. We do give banksman training to our firefighters, and then when they do their driver training, the need to use banksman is reinforced at that point as well. It's an ongoing part actually of the 3-year maintenance phase development planner, and the modules that are covered in that driver training, not just at drivers but at firefighters, is part of that that ongoing need for refresher. So yes is the short answer, and a slightly longer answer added on as well there.
I hoped you'd say that, Bruce. My concern then is, are these low-level manoeuvres, especially when reversing, because they aren't using banksman when they should have been, or I just don't know. But is it a failure of someone to follow the proper procedures, or is it someone just reacting quickly without thinking? And as long as you've got the banksman's training therein and it's being reinforced, fine. But that's just the thing that occurred to me.
Yeah, I think if I could just come back in, yeah, I think you're right. There is again a mixture of those types. So we have events taking place where vehicle marshals are in place, excuse me, and others where there's been deviation from our recognised procedure where they haven't put those in place. But you know, it's concerning in both sets of those information. You know, if there's vehicle marshals, why are we still having these types of events? So yeah, it's a challenge.
Okay, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks, Paul. Steve, just before I bring yourself in, Andy, do you want to come in on that point?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just on that point, Paul, you're absolutely right. And I think in the report, it kind of highlights that there's only 20% or 20% of the vehicle accidents used driver's assistance, so 8% didn't. So it's clearly a piece of work for us to do around about management of those situations. in terms of the responsibility, what sits where within the responsibility of who, in terms of officer in charge, the driver and the driver assistants, which is something that we're focusing on through the subgroups.
Thanks for that, Andy. Steve?
Thanks, Mary. Short contribution from me. Firstly, I agree with everything that Paul said. And it is absolutely brilliant that an organisation such as Scottish Fire and Rescue can have no ridders in a quarter. It's outstanding. But the other point I was going to make was just to say that I think there's stuff the board can be doing to support the issue of acts of violence, whether it's communication, whether it's working our own networks, and whether it's just being there to offer support to people who have gone through the trauma of those verbal or physical abuse incidents. So I would encourage the officers to be asking the board for direct support, for direct help. Tell us what we can do, where we can do it, and I'm sure that you'll get a very supportive response. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Fiona, you had your hand up. Are you okay, or do you want to come in?
It was about Banksman, but I googled it, so thank you.
Okay, fair enough. Power of Google. Excellent. The only things just to add in terms of from myself, the acts of violence element, I take on board what Paul's saying, and actually if it is a question that we're better at recording, then that's encouraging. But the trend itself is still one that I certainly wouldn't want to see continuing if at all possible. I think the more concerning thing from my side of things is, if I recall correctly, going back when we saw the trend more historic, we always saw a peak in Q3, which of course we would expect to see to some extent. What is slightly more concerning is that we're now seeing that there's not a drop off in Q4, certainly not at the rate that we used to have. So I think that there definitely is something there, and if there is any opportunity for the board to contribute in any way, shape or form to that, then that would certainly be, I'm sure, very welcome from any of us. The vehicle accident point is one I was going to raise as well, but I think there's definitely a query from my side of things about that reassurance coming from, is it the policy itself that needs to be reviewed because people are following it and it's not successful, or is it that people aren't following the policy, and then what are we doing about that? But you've kind of touched on most of that. The only thing I wanted to pick up was actually on under 5.3.4, and it's a trivial matter to some extent. That's page 81, and it's the 4 to 6 days. And what you're seeing is actually an annual trend to some extent. Or it looks as though it's a bit of an annual trend, where it peaks in Q2 and 3 and then drops in Q4 a little bit. It'd be really interesting to see if that continues, and if it does, it'd be really interesting to see if there's a rationale as to why the absence days kind of trend up from Q1 to Q3 and then come back down from Q4. It's just when there's a pattern, sometimes there's an ability to analyse it. But anyway, it's just my little thoughts for what they were worth. But can I just come back to Paul's point about the zero ridder incidents? And actually, I think, can we make a particular note within the minute that the committee would like to congratulate everybody involved? That's a significant achievement. And I think it's something as well that the committee has the responsibility to make sure that the board themselves as a whole are aware of. That's not something to be missed, and we should be recognising that. So thank you, Paul, for highlighting that as well. Is there anything else in this item, Andy?
Thanks, Chair. Probably just to touch on your last point there, and I've had conversations with Jim since coming into post about, really trying to embed that more positive culture in terms of health and safety within the organisation. And I think news like the statistics on the ridders is something that we can celebrate as successful and a very positive thing. So I'm keen to explore that with Jim and how we try to kind of foster and embed that much more positive health and safety culture and approach across the service, and things like this will help.
And I think if there's anything that we can do, Andy, to help celebrate that message, then please do let us know. I'm not.
Can I just come back in?
Yeah.
Can I just come back with one quick comment there? When I used to work with the construction industry on this, they used to have really good celebration and things. You often see signboards on construction sites saying X number of days since an accident and that sort of thing. There is something to look up about what the construction industry does to celebrate health and safety success, because it's work there.
Mm-hmm. Okie dokie. Thank you very much, everybody. As always, the assurance reports are continuing to be very encouraging. I think there are some bits and pieces you can see from our questions that we're particularly interested in seeing how they progress. But a huge thank you to everybody. It's no small thing to put them together, so we do appreciate it. If we can, though, we're going to take item 9.3, which is the Staffing Tactical Action Group now. Andy and Lindsay are down for an update. I'm conscious as well that Stuart's here, but if we kick things off with Lindsay possibly, and then bring in the other two as you wish.
Thank you very much. So as I mentioned earlier, the Staffing Tactical Action Group has been formed to lead the activity of the service in addressing the challenges that we have connected to changes in our retirement profile. And to support that work in terms of carrying through the actions, a staffing solutions team has been created as well. And the staffing solutions team are currently working on 6 distinct work packages covering different areas of activity. So those are looking at staffing and skill rebalancing. So in essence, what is the retirement profile doing to staffing numbers and distribution of skills across operational colleagues? Looking at our staffing business continuity arrangements to make sure that those are appropriately refined or amended as required by the changes to our retirement profile. The group is also looking at the capabilities we have within the day duty population and how and when we may want to look at using colleagues who are currently in day duty roles to support the 5-watch duty system. There is a significant amount of work which is also linked to the activity of the on-call improvement programme around on-call to whole-time migration for those on-call colleagues who would also like the opportunity of a career within the whole-time service. And also for those colleagues looking at how we may be able to expedite their pathway to competence and recognition of the skills that they have through their career in the on-call service. There is work underway around re-employment and maximising availability. So we've reviewed the re-employment policy. There's been a significant amount of communication to colleagues around abatement and pensions, being very mindful not to provide pension advice, but making sure people have the access that they need to accurate information around how any re-employment in a different role may or may not affect the pension to which they're entitled following their retirement. The local senior officers within service delivery areas have been having conversations with colleagues who are potentially in scope for some of the pension changes and having discussions with them about whether or not they would be minded to explore re-employment opportunities. And we're also creating a list or a pool of those vacancies within the service which would be suitable re-employment opportunities for colleagues who are retiring. And the 6th and final work package at the moment is around the management of pre-arranged overtime and how we'll use that to ensure that we maintain availability and our confidence levels. There is, over and above that, a significant amount of work happening within the workforce planning team to model what that retirement profile might look like over the next couple of years, and using that to inform both whole-time firefighter campaigns. As Bruce mentioned earlier, his team have been able to look at different ways of delivering that firefighter trainee programme. So we've been able to increase numbers of the intakes that are coming up, and also looking at the consequential activities for teams like the health and wellbeing teams, so that we get through the health and fitness assessments that are required for higher levels of recruitment. And finally, also looking at our promotion campaigns. A significant number of those individuals in scope are in the flexi duty officer cadre, so there will, as a consequence, be a significant amount of promotion activity and development support for those newly promoted officers, and we're working to make sure we retain the right balance between delivering those promotion processes but not compromising availability within the 5-watch duty system. So that is a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the staffing solutions team and the staffing tag. I'm happy to take any questions, and perhaps it would be helpful to invite Stuart in if there's anything else as chair of the group that he'd like to cover.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was really useful. Stuart, do you want to come in?
I think Lindsay's covered it really, really well, to be honest with you, Mary. I think the only thing I would add is clearly this is quite a significant challenge for the service, and a lot of adversity from this, but there's also a lot of opportunity from this. So what's overarching all the stuff that Lindsay just described is leadership and culture, and how we can use this as an opportunity to develop the leadership and culture of the organisation to meet this demand, to plug that experience gap that a lot of newly promoted officers will come through. There's other agendas that we need to tap into in terms of diversity, inclusion, more empowerment for local managers, improving the RVDS. This all comes underneath that as well. So there is a real opportunity here to reshape the organisation using this as a measure to do that.
Thank you, Stuart. Just before I ask if there's any other questions, can I just ask you a couple of things just to check on my that I've cottoned on correctly? Lindsay, when you say on call, we are talking about essentially the RVDS as well as part of that, aren't we?
Yes.
Yes. So the idea that we create a pathway which would expedite their competency into full time, I think, is really exciting. Actually, I'm quite excited about that, if that's the right word. But also just in terms of that re-employment, because I did write down a quick question to ask Stuart later on, but I take it that we're including within that then the looking at retiring firefighters potentially being re-engaged as RVDS personnel. Stuart, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in that point?
Yeah, but that's something we do at the moment, Matt, is to try and actively encourage people to join RVDS when they retire. And a lot of people want to do that anyway because they want to maintain a connection to the service, and if they live in an area with RVDS, then they do that. The migration part, and I'll come into a bit more detail. Like you, I'm really, really enthusiastic, and I think this would be a real good win for the organisation, both to attract people to RVDS, but give that natural progression the whole time as well, because a lot of people join. It's like the police, they join the specials to then join the police and stuff like that as well. And most people would retain a dual contract once they've done that as well. So it solves a number of issues for us as well. So yeah, we're really kind of enthusiastic by that.
No, it's exciting. Liz, do you want to come in on that?
It was just a quick addition to what Stuart previously said about the opportunity that this presents and the leadership and culture side of things. One of the other things that the team in POD are doing is looking at realigning our focus on leadership development to help plug the gap that losing a number of managers and senior people creates, so that we're expediting the development of people, because it's one thing bringing new firefighters in, but we are in a position where we are potentially diluting our leadership capacity, so we're also looking at that. So it's really a holistic approach to the whole situation. So I just wanted to re-emphasize that.
Well, thanks, Liz. I think that's what makes this so exciting. If that's again the right word, I don't know. Maybe I'm getting excited about things that I don't fully understand quite yet, but I think actually what you've explained so far sounds really optimistic and a great way forward. And is there anything that you want to add to that at the moment?
Nothing further to add, Chair.
Grant, are there any questions from the committee? I hope everybody's as optimistic and as excited as I am about some of this. Excellent. Malcolm?
Yeah, no, not a question, just to say the same, that I'm enthusiastic and excited about this. And part of the reason I think is the scope that you are looking at quite strategic changes and things. It's not just a little working group that can deal within the existing systems, but the impression I get very much is it can also bring forward recommendations and change at a strategic level. And I think that's it is a very positive development in terms of the work you're doing, but that kind of structure of a tag, that has that kind of remit. So thank you, it's good.
Thank you, Malcolm. I think that said it far more eloquently than I did as well, so I appreciate that. Stuart?
Apologies, Chair. I was remiss of me not to say this before, but just for assurance for the committee as well, that the relationships between the group of the tag and the group that's supporting that, the staff and solutions team and the rep bodies is absolutely superb at the moment. There's real good working relationships between the rep bodies, and they are working in partnership with us to develop a lot of these solutions, particularly around RVDS migration, things like that as well. So it's very, very positive, and I think it's worthwhile highlighting that in this committee.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart, because I think it is important that we highlight where we are working very well with our rep bodies as well, because we do really appreciate that. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, then just wishing you good luck with that work. As I said, we are very enthusiastic about it. If we can, just so that you're aware, it is my working thought process at the moment to take a break after item 11, so I'm not promising that we will be going on too far. So if anybody's waiting desperately for a bit of a break, then we won't wait too long, hopefully. But if we can move on to number 10, and Bruce, I think this is back with yourself. So it's the Independent Audit and Inspection Action Plan.
Thank you very much, Chair. And with the added pressure of a break immediately after I finish, I'll get right to the report. So overall, the action plan is sitting at 92% complete, and all of the actions that are nearing completion are sitting at green. There is 2 asks within the report. The first is to consider a revised due date for action 9.3 to May 2022, which I recognise is passed, but this is in relation to the 100% completion for the ICT work to improve the situation on our retail and volunteer stations. The second ask is in relation to action 21.1, and that it be moved to business as usual. Through COVID, our way of working changed significantly, and we've got our digital first policy, so the networking, engaging, training, etc. has all become business as usual. So to have it as a separate action now seems to be moot. I'll stop there, Chair. Happy to take any questions either on the 2 asks that are made or indeed the appendices attached to the report.
Thank you, Bruce. Can I just check as well that the extension to May 2022, given that it's passed, that extension would allow for 100% completion because it's done now already? Yeah. I
would love to confirm that. We're just waiting on that 100% confirmation from ICT, but they have given no indication that that's not going to be forthcoming.
Okie dokie. Thank you. Any questions or queries on any of these? Is everybody content with the requests that Bruce is making? Yes, in which case that all seems to be in hand. Thank you very much, Bruce. That was much appreciated. Okay. Can I ask, does everybody want to take a break just now, or would you like to complete item 11 beforehand? Break now, nods. If you're saying yes, people would. So in which case, can I ask you guys to be back here about 8 minutes past 11? Okie dokie. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, is everybody back? Which seems a rather redundant question, because if you aren't back, you can't answer yes. Let's assume then for a moment that everybody is back. And if we can, we'll move on to item 11 in the Health and Safety Annual Report for 2020-2021. So Andy, this is over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll introduce the paper, and if it's okay with you, I'll bring Jim in to maybe draw out some of the highlights of the report. The report's already been through the National Safety and Assurance Board and SLT for decision comes in front of the committee today for scrutiny. I think the report itself, when it's viewed, should be viewed in the context of the period it was over, that COVID period, right at the height of the pandemic. And I think it absolutely highlights the excellent response to the service in terms of our health and safety arrangements to COVID, which were deemed as best practice by the Health and Safety Executive at the time. But also our ability to progress the business as usual work streams at the same time. I think it really reflects an excellent piece of work over that period by the team. And a point to pick up on in the Health and Safety Q4 report that we just previously looked at in terms of the health and safety improvement plans, we saw a 12% increase from the previous year. This report also shows a 12% increase from the previous year, so I think that shows that steady improvement in terms of health and safety culture and approach to health and safety across the organisation that we'll hopefully build on going forward. And if it's okay with you now, Chair, I'll bring Jim in to highlight any points within the report that he would like to bring to the committee.
Yep, thank you, Andy. Thank you, Chair. I guess first of all, by way of context, it is the 2020 to 21 report, and I apologise for the delay in bringing this before the committee. There was a significant amount of reprioritisation during that period due to the pandemic and other work streams, but moving forward, we're looking to review the format of the report and to try to expedite the publication of it. And that's linked to some of the work that's ongoing in terms of the reporting functionality within the TAS system, which is our health and safety management system, which is in development at the moment. So thank you for your patience. And as previously mentioned, just by way of summary, a significant amount of resource was allocated to responding to the pandemic. and guidance and arrangements were put in place, which again, as Andy mentioned, were recognised by the HSE. And although that did have an impact on business as usual in terms of reallocation of staff, we still saw that good performance in terms of the improvement plan. The COVID reports, COVID statistics within the report are reported separately on this occasion. And when we look at our performance against, when we try to benchmark against some other services, we've only have access to 6 other services information for this report. However, the performance is very strong when we consider it in relation to those other services. This is something we're looking to build upon moving forward through the National Fire Chiefs Council Health and Safety Committee to try to gather consistent information from other services so we can benchmark more accurately against like services, although there aren't many that are exactly like ourselves. Again, just by way of summary, the accident injuries and RIDORs within the period show a positive downward trend. RIDOR reportable events, again, most common cause is relation to body movement and manual handling, so musculoskeletal, which I've touched on earlier on. However, when we look at across the number of operational incidents we attend, it works out at around 1 injury every 6,500 incidents that we attend. So in relation to the number of events or incidents we attend, that's a fairly low stat, and when we compare that again to the number of absence days resulting from those injuries, those tend to be in the shorter term. So although we are still having those, and those are the most common trend, the actual outcomes and consequence of them remain to be fairly controlled. I'll draw your attention to, in the covering report, 3.6 talks about slips, trips and falls, and there is an inaccuracy in that percentage that's reported there. So 24 to 34 in relation to slips, trips and falls isn't the 11% noted, and the increase that should be a 70% increase, which we will adjust in that report. But again, most of those were associated to inclement weather and slips on ice and things like that. And we've again promoted our winter weather campaigns and gritting of appliance sprays, etc., to try to address those. Similarly to what was previously mentioned, impact with moving objects and the stowage of equipment, it again raised its head during that period. So it's something that we need to focus our attention on a little bit. In relation to RIDOR events, again, a reduction noted, 17 events across the year, and no specified injuries, which is obviously a positive, and all of the reported RIDOR events were in relation to lost time over 7-day absence. As I said, we report within this report on COVID separately, and during that period, obviously at the start and the height of the pandemic, we had 352 confirmed cases, and 15% of those were reportable transmissions, so workplace transmissions. It's interesting to note that the majority of those happened early in the pandemic, whilst our arrangements were being developed and put in place. So it shows that we did react to what we were faced with, and have subsequently seen good reductions in terms of workplace transmissions, which will be reported on in subsequent reports. Again, near miss reporting at this point was sitting at a ratio of 9:1 across the year, which is more healthy than what we reported previously, but still has room for improvement. And those near misses were split pretty evenly between operational activities and property issues, which have been addressed. In terms of acts of violence, again, that increase in trend is noted, but when we look at it in terms of number of incidents attended, it works out about 1 in every 1,300 incidents attended, which although we still look to reduce that, it gives a bit of context to that figure. The vehicle accidents are very similar again to what we've previously reported, and unfortunately the hit and fixing stationary objects and low speed manoeuvres continues to be the trend that's identified in this report. Again, when looking at the numbers against incidents attended, it's 1 in 590, which is real evidence that we need to try to make improvements in relation to vehicle accidents. And if we can give the committee a little bit of assurance in relation to that, the driver safety group is well cited on that, and we're looking at a range of different approaches to try to address the vehicle accidents within the service, including the communication out of the impact of these incidents, both financially and on our resilience. I'm happy to provide any further detail, but I'll pause there and take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jim. I don't know if there are questions from the committee, but I just thought personally I found page 17 and page 18 particularly interesting. Benchmarking against other services was very reassuring and quite encouraging, and I think it probably underlines why it's useful on occasions to do benchmarking. And then the 18, in the context of our earlier conversation during the assurance report, it's interesting to see trends over that 4-year period, and actually to understand that when you take it that step back, some of the things that we're seeing trending up at the moment in the assurance reporting are actually trending down over that longer period of time. So I found that reassuring, and generally as a whole, I was quite happy with the report. So thank you for all the work that's gone into that, Tim. I'll come back to that point in a second. But Paul, do you want to come in?
Thank you very much indeed. Sorry.
I suspect Paul's puppy's misbehaving.
No, it isn't the puppy, it's the pone. I wish it was the puppy, it's easier to deal with. Paul Stollard, non-executive board member. Can I start off with a negative, please? I think it is quite wrong that we're receiving this at this meeting. I think this should have been received in the previous year. And I think I'm sure you're aware of that, but it's a serious problem when we are getting an annual report which is effectively a year late. And I think I'd like to be assured that there is a performance plan of how we're going to receive the next one more timiously. And I'd like to have dates, please, of which meeting it will be coming to for the People Committee and therefore onto the main board. So that's the negative. And I feel I have to say that. I would even have, if you can't do the fully sort of beautifully prepared and illustrated, and then fine, give me a rough copy or a work in progress, but I don't think the committee should have to wait effectively for a year. On the positive side, it's a really good report, and it reflects well on the whole department and the whole function within the organisation. And it's a shame that you can't, in fact, take the credit for it at the time that it should have been taken, if you see what I mean. I actually had sight of this in discussion with a couple of colleagues earlier in the year in draft form, and I was disappointed then that we weren't going to see it sort of finalised quicker. And therefore, that's why I mean about it doesn't have to be quite as perfect in glossiness. So that's the point I want to make, Chair, and I'm sorry to be sort of so curmudgeonly about it, but I think it's an important thing.
No,
Thanks.
thank you, Paul. And just for your reassurance, Andy and I have already spoken about this. So, I mean, we are all, as a committee, we're all aware of the pressures that have existed over the last period. That doesn't necessarily negate the core point of Paul's aspects that he's raised. But Andy and I have already spoken about it, and I think optimistically we would be looking at sometime in the autumn meeting. Would be what our expectation would be, Paul, but that will get clarified, bearing in mind that Andy's only been in post for a little while, and that'll get clarified as we go forward as well. Jim, do you want to come back on that though?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I completely support Paul's feedback, and it's something that, as you say, you've been discussing, but we've been doing some work in the background to make sure that we can provide this report to you more quickly in future. So fully take it on board. By way of assurance, the actions coming out of the report have been progressed in lieu of the report being published, so we haven't sat on any known risks during that period, and those have been addressed and progressed as required. But thank you for your feedback.
Thank you, Jim. And is there anything you want to add to that?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to reiterate what Jim said and provide that further reassurance that I know we have spoken about it, Chair, to give Paul that we will look to that autumn meeting. That's the kind of target. I need to work through that with Jim, obviously, just to get more detail on it, and we'll come back with that reassurance.
Paul?
Can I just offer any sort of help that I could offer to the team? And if you wanted to informally let me see drafts or anything at any stage, either by email or a quick meeting, I'm more than happy to be involved. This is something obviously I feel passionate about, and I want to be supportive of the function, which I think is doing a good job. And if there's any way I can be supportive, just ask.
Thanks for that, Paul. Are there any other questions or queries about this report? Is everybody content to say that we have scrutinised that? And from here, it then goes to the board at, I was about to say at the end of the month, but next week, essentially. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Jim, for that, because actually the report as a whole, as we've already heard, is really good, and we really appreciate it. And I think it does demonstrate that the Directorate as a whole is working really well on those issues as well. Okay, if we could move on then to item 12, which is the mental health strategy and the mental wellbeing champion update. I think this is Sandra. So I will hand over to Sandra if she's here.
I'm here, Chair. Thank you very much. I'll talk through the paper that will provide an update on the Mental Health and Wellbeing Action Plan, and also provide a champions update, a wellbeing champion update to the committee this morning. Just a brief overview from myself, because I'll note that everybody has read the paper, had time to do that. Our mental health strategy is delivered through the action plan. It's supported by the action plan, and progress is reported through the Mental Health and Wellbeing Group. The actions on it are mostly driven in the main by the health and wellbeing team, but with considerable contribution from the 5 thematic subgroups that you'll note from the paper. The membership of those spans SFRS, so that's really what drives the plan. SFRS collaborates right across the blue light community and with many external partners, including the Royal Foundation. So we've recently aligned our action plan to the Blue Light Together Mental Health at Work framework for many reasons, but primarily because it will allow us, amongst other things, to benchmark our actions and progress against other blue light services, which we think is very valuable. So we've now aligned our action plan to the 6 standards of the framework, and hopefully we'll be able to track that over time and map our progress and success. But one of the key issues you'll see from the report is the absence levels due to psychological reasons and related to mental ill health, and the associated costs of that, and those costs are in the report. we really want to understand much better in the future what our data is telling us and be able to shape our action plan towards that, because we know that firefighters are more likely to suffer mental ill health because of their occupational exposure to trauma, etc., and that they often operate in a kind of challenging culture that when it comes to reaching out for support, that can be quite difficult. So our action plan seeks to tackle this and other issues in a proactive and a very preventative manner, hoping that we'll promote mental well-being throughout the service. We're already seeing some evidence of change in the pattern of referrals that are coming into health and wellbeing, both self-referrals and management referrals, which I think is quite important to note. We're seeing an upward trend, particularly in the number of referrals that are coming in through the crisis route, which would suggest that people are seeking that help and support earlier than they were in not so long ago. We're also beginning to see an overall increase in the number of people accessing full health and wellbeing services across the board as we raise the profile of the work of the department, and more importantly, the supports that are out there for people as we do some onward referrals into other agencies and whilst providing support from SFRS as well. Another key element of our preventative approach is the creation of the network of mental wellbeing champions throughout the service. You'll note from the paper that our expectations were vastly exceeded in terms of numbers coming forward, and the process of appointment of the champions and the development is well underway. And today is in fact the first induction day for the first cohort of champions. We're delighted to be at this juncture, and that means that that going live date will be just around the corner and certainly within the next few weeks. And thereafter, a programme of ongoing support for the champions will be in place when they are in role. The programme will continue on a rolling basis. We're very confident about that, and we will be able to increase the network of champions across the service and of course their reach right into the individuals that need that help and support most. So I'm happy to provide further detail or Chair take questions on any aspect of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. It will come as part of the theme today that I myself have a couple of questions, but before I move on to them, Malcolm, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, no, again, an area of huge interest and huge importance, and thank you for all the work that's being done there, really positive. I just thought it might be useful, could you tell us a bit more about the role of the champions, just to, I think we have had it mentioned before, but just to explain the background and how that will work, and then I probably have a follow-up question to that once I get that info. Thanks.
Okay, Malcolm, not a problem. I'd be delighted to talk about the champions. Yeah, so we put a campaign together just at the end of 21, reaching out into the service to see if anybody would be interested in becoming a mental wellbeing champion. And that's not to say that there was an absence of people, more sort of wellbeing advocates in the service before. It was just a case of us formalising, if you like, the offering, and making sure that if you were a firefighter or a member of staff in some place that you got the same equitable support as you would if you were a firefighter in an area where, you know, you had a fairly active advocate. So it was just about evening out that service and making sure that everybody had fair and equal access. It was also, the programme is about equipping people for that role and making sure that they're developed. So each champion, as they come in and they have a one-to-one discussion with somebody in my team before they pass through onto the training matrix, just to make sure that they know exactly what they're signing up for and what the expectations would be. And thereafter, I talked about that programme of ongoing support, because to give support to other people, of course, you must be supported yourself. So that's a really important aspect of it too. The champions, you asked me about what they would be expected to do. So it's not about going in there as a psychological expert. That's not what it's about. It's about making sure they're a highway of information back and forward, because we've got a lot of information in the centre about supports and about campaigns, if you like. We're very active around wellbeing and inclusion. So it will be about signposting primarily. That's the primary role of a champion, to be there to signpost, to know that they're supported back into the health and wellbeing team, and that they're not left exposed. I'm sure they'll do much more, but it's a very positive role, and it's about being a touch point as close to the source as possible.
No, that's really helpful and in line with kind of my expectations. Thank you. That is very positive. That does lead to my follow-up, which is I notice you say you were also improving and extending support provided to include retirees, volunteers, and the families of our employees, which is absolutely fantastic. I suppose I just wondered, can that be a little bit two-way, as well as supporting retirees, volunteers, and families? Is there any scope for them to help in that kind of way the champions do? Maybe not to be labelled as a champion, but to help with some of that signposting and support, especially retirees. I'm thinking maybe some people that can just do something in that line. So it's just a thought, is the extension to include retirees and volunteers and so on, is that a little bit two-way as well as providing them with support?
Malcolm, I think you make a very good point there. And it is something that we are working hard to be better at. And I think, you know, our retired cadre, especially in light of the what's been happening recently with lots of people retiring, I think there's a tremendous skill base and expertise there that we should be tapping into. We're already beginning to do that. I talked there about our wellbeing and inclusion work and about the campaigns. And there is a campaign that's coming up in the not too distant future where we've reached out far and wide, and retired members are supporting with that campaign right back into the service. It is the 5 ferries cycle. If anybody's interested in that, and the retired cadre are a huge part of the organisation of that, and that's a wellbeing campaign that we're very proud of.
Good, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good.
There aren't any other questions. I've got 2 wee points of just assurance, really, Sandra. One is that we talk a lot about preventing suicide, but sadly what we do know that happens is that where there's one instance of suicide, there's a higher increased vulnerability to there being further ones. So it's not just about there being preventative activity, but postvention, rather than just early intervention, but actually that postvention element, and it's whether or not that's also being thought of. But also just assurance, really, that the wellbeing champions wouldn't just be referring to national or SFRS resources, but would be actively encouraged to try and identify what's available within their immediate communities, and to often refer individuals into those activities, because as we know, mental health and wellbeing requires multitudes of responses. It could be anything from health walks right the way through. So it's what activities being done to actively encourage champions to make themselves more aware of the resources and services and other types of interventions that might be available to them within those immediate environments. And then the third one isn't really a comment for now, but I think it would be really interesting to get a bit of an update in the future that also includes how are we measuring an impact on this. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to have formal KPIs, but it'd be really interesting to know about, is this activity making an impact, which is almost difficult because you're measuring something that hasn't happened. I think there's something in terms of that reassurance that this is doing something, and it might be that that's more qualitative than quantitative, but it'd be interesting to do that. But I'm not really looking for a comment necessarily on that just now, but just anything in terms of the postvention and the mapping activity, Sandra.
Sure, Mary, if I am able to state your second point first, if that makes sense. In terms of the champions and their signposting back into their areas, they will be very much encouraged to do that. And I talked earlier about some of the practices that already existed locally within stations and areas. And a lot of that good practice we've tried to harness. And we saw quite early on that there were some areas that were really, really good at having directory of resources that were bespoke to those areas and those tap-in services, because you're right, you know, you need to know what's going on locally. Sometimes they are faster or more appropriate. So I can definitely give you assurance that that directory of resources for champions to operate locally is front and centre of what we are doing, and part of the induction with them as well. They'll be actively encouraged to do that. We'll be using the on-station notice boards, the good old notice board, and that's where people will display the information, and they'll be encouraged to have their directory as well as the directory of champions across the service, because some people might not want to tap into their own area. They might want to speak to a champion elsewhere. So there's absolute assurance on that. The other thing that you talked about there was about suicide prevention, a massive topic for us. And you'll see that one of the thematic subgroups for delivering aspects of the strategy is the suicide prevention subgroup. And we do lots of work around not just the prevention of suicide, but although we hope it's effective, but when we need to be more proactive post, then we do that too. We've actually stood up a number of processes recently to strengthen what happens within the service. And again, there's been massive collaboration at a national level for us as we build intelligence and approaches, hooking into the expertise that's going on nationally and with other partner organisations too. So that subgroup is very active, and we'll be looking to replicate a lot of good practice and make ourselves more resilient and local areas too. And your last point, although you didn't ask for comment on it, but I think, again, this is something that we're massively interested in. There's so much work going on in terms of trying to change culture and impact on that positively. It's really important that we know where we're at. Now, in many ways, we haven't quite refined how we're going to do that, but we are now looking at trends and data that's talked about in the paper, and our performance quarter by quarter, just to see what's happening. A lot of that is quantitative, but again, through time, we'll look at the qualitative parts, and we are already starting to do that too. So thank you for your questions and your comments.
Thank you, Sandra. And I could ask you 1,000 more, I suspect, and I'd be a horrific chair for timekeeping if I did. But I do wish you very much, the very best with this programme. It's not.
Thank you.
It's not an easy area of work to necessarily be confident that you can bring solutions to. It's by nature a very wicked problem, but it's something we all need to work on to the best of our ability. So really best of luck, Sandra, and thank you for bringing that report to us.
Thank you, Chair.
Stuart.
Thanks, Chair. And just to perhaps just amplify that point you made there, and without trying to embarrass Sandra, the impact that this is having across the service and service delivery in particular, from my perspective, is absolutely massive. It's been embraced really, really well, and it's changed what was quite a masculine culture really quite quickly, and people really opening up now around about suicide prevention and mental health issues as well. So I don't think that the distance we've travelled in a very short time can be underestimated, and that's absolute credit to Liz, the team, and Sandra for the work they've done for that.
Thank you, Stuart. I'll take that back to the team.
Perfectly okay to embarrass Sandra in that case, Stuart. Thank you for that. It's no easy feat. So, yes, best of luck. It'd be really good to hear how it's going, Sandra, in the future as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then, ladies and gentlemen, we'll move on to the People Committee Risk Register. So we're going to start with the Aligned Directorate Risks. And Scott, I've got a note that that's yourself and not Lindsay.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, myself and Lindsay high-fived on this one this morning in the base of Lindsay having the thick end of the wedge. So yeah, just by way of quick introduction, obviously there's quite a bit of detail in there in relation to the risk summary, and you'll see as always that it's a combination of aligned risks across the respective directorates. I'll maybe just highlight a couple of points from Pod's perspective, and then if it's okay, bring in Jim and Bruce to speak from a health and safety and training perspective. But again, just by way of quick summary and reassurance, in terms of that ongoing review and scrutiny from within the Pod Directorate, you'll see there's been some subtle changes since the last quarterly report. There's a caveat that I need to give, is that by the time this makes its way to yourselves, it's kind of been discussed 2-3 months previously. So again, as a directorate, we'll be reviewing it again mid-July as a collective, but we review it on an ongoing weekly basis. So you'll see there's in relation to Pod 4, we've increased the scoring, and I think we've probably heard around around recruitment and some of the challenges already this morning in reasons for that. Things like sort of market pressure, the pension remedy, increasing volume, our ability to onboard as quickly as we'd like. So back in April, certainly when influenced from the pension remedy piece, we increased that probability from a 3 to a 4. That's not to say that it won't reduce again when we review it in a couple of weeks' time, but I think at that point in time it was quite new and there was a sense of more was coming. So that hopefully gives a bit of context to that increase. You'll also see from a couple of the other risks there, Pod 8 for example, as we start to see a shift in the pandemic in terms of those restrictions and ease of movement and practice, we've reduced the scoring around our ability to the risk against our ability to undertake medicals for recruitment purposes, and certainly from a health and wellbeing team's perspective, that's becoming easier or has become easier. So again, we've reduced the probability on that one, which reduces the overall score. And also just the last one maybe to mention, I'm not suggesting this is a good news story because it's the area of employment tribunals and they happen and we are unfortunately not immune to them like any other organisation. But again, having recently concluded quite a number of tribunals and in a lot of cases successfully concluded, if that's the right word, we have reduced the potential impact there on Pod Risk 9 around the financial impact of tribunals. So again, with just before I bring in Jim on the health and safety, I think it's just to reiterate that from a pod perspective, risk is an ongoing conversation for us. It's very much something that we're working hard to be talking about locally and to be discussing locally, and it's not just about ticking a box and increasing a score, is making sure the controls and the likes are delivering what we hope to do. So with that, I'll hand over to Jim, and if it's okay, Jim, maybe we could just handle questions collectively at the end once Jim and Bruce have come in with their part. So I'll pause there and hand over to Jim. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Just a few maybe to draw your attention to. TSA 9, we've seen an increase in probability from 4 to 5. That's in relation to the development of the task system and some slippage in relation to that linked directly to capacity within ICT. However, what we have done is focused on the reporting elements which are key to the full system, and hopefully we certainly have seen some significant progress in that over the last few weeks, so that will be highlighted moving forward. TSA 10 again is around capacity in relation to the pension remedy and the impact of that for the progression of improvement plans, and I guess slight concern that our business partners will have other priorities, so we're monitoring that closely and we'll look to reprioritise on legal compliance if required as an option moving forward. TSA 3 references learning lessons, and just to highlight some other work that's been progressed, an organisational learning group has been established, and that looks to really draw on any outcomes, outstanding actions and investigation reports to make sure that those actions are prioritised and expedited. So we've had our first couple of those meetings which have been very well received and seen some traction moving forward. We're also reviewing our investigation arrangements to look at how we can work together in relation to the Operational Assurance 21 process, and maybe link those two processes to speed up the response to any lessons that need to be learned and our reaction to them. And finally, in relation to controls in TSA 5, references audit processes, and just to highlight that those are now ready to be rolled out. We've changed the terminology in relation to audits to mirror what we used during the pandemic, so that sort of more support review approach with a view to taking the stigma attached to audit when people see that on the paper or on the email, to be more about supporting our personnel and how we can learn from that process and use our combined experience to see improvements within the service. That's really all from me, thanks.
Chair, I'll just come in at that point and give the update on the training focused risks. So without getting into specifics, I'd just like to highlight some of the really good work that's going on to de-risk our work and to highlight that the risk register is a key driver for our work planning. This is exactly how we plan our work. We have a focus on this at our monthly FMTs, at our DMTs, and we have risk spotlights every meeting as well to make sure that our focus is never diverted from the risks that we're carrying. So there's been some really good work recently to generate capacity. The ones I'll draw your attention to are firstly work with the Reform Collaboration Group and the subgroup of that, which is a driver collaboration group. We're about to see Police Scotland delivering for the first time our emergency response driving modules for our flexi duty officer cadre. So they have some spare capacity at this stage. The standards that they employ are identical to ours because they all come from the same source document, and we will be having 2 of our flexi duty officers trained by police trainers, likely to be in the borders area in the emergency response driving elements of their work. The group that sits above the driver collaboration group, which is the Emergency Services Training Coordination Group, we're doing some really good work just now to identify the areas of overlap in our what's been termed specialist training. Now, it's important to know that the specialist training in that context doesn't necessarily mean specialist for us. So one of the areas is breathing apparatus, for example, which isn't specialist for us, it's core, but it's specialist for police and ambulance. So we're identifying all those areas of overlap and seeing where we can generate shared capacity. As has been mentioned previously in the meeting, our capacity to bring trainees in has been increased, and we're looking on the next 2 courses on our whole-time firefighter foundation course to have 96 trainees, which is an increase from the mid-60s that we've had in the previous courses. This is all due to the change guidance that came from the Scottish Government and our resulting action in relation to the COVID restriction measures. And the final point I'll draw your attention to, the work we're doing to just build capacity, is to use the model that's already in place in service delivery for the rural full-time support officers and build a role around about that for a training instructor. So we'll be delivering training at the point of need rather than bringing people into a central location or central locations. Far more efficient, and it builds that capacity for us to have specialist training, i.e. driver training in this instance, delivered in the rural communities on the mainland at this stage, but we're anticipating moving that onto the islands as well. There's just still some work to be done with the Section 19 application that's been put forward by the Westminster Government. I'll pause there, and as Scott said, if there's any questions, I'll happily take them.
So the first question is, are there any questions? I think, to be fair, the report's reasonably comprehensive. Malcolm, do you want to come in?
Thank you. Yes, indeed, it is comprehensive. It takes a bit of mulling over to get my head around all the bits, but that's good. You know, it's really good to have that level of detail there that you can tie in. Just a very specific point, really, for Jim. I think you mentioned TSA 9 and the increase in risk there. I noted that. I'm looking on page 174 where you're well, page 174, whatever that does, that table. And I see there's kind of 2 aspects. One is in the control comments, there's an ongoing development issue that may be resolved in May 22. So that was why I kind of noted it, was looking for an update. So my understanding is IT are working on that and are hoping to be able to resolve stuff. And then linking back to the column on the action description, if they don't manage that, you're perhaps looking at an off-the-shelf system. So my question is just, where are we with that, trying to resolve it internally, assuming I've understood it correctly, which is maybe a big assumption, but where are we in resolving it internally, and are we looking in parallel at the off-the-shelf system, or is it a case of continuing to work to see if we can resolve it, and then at what point do we look at a possible procurement of a system? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Your understanding's absolutely correct, Malcolm. So yeah, we're working closely with ICT at the moment. As I said, we're we're considering all our options in relation to this. So the initial approach would be to, as I said, to develop that reporting module, which has been that sort of key sticking point up to now, which I think we're nearly over the line with. Touch wood, I expect to see that being published pretty soon. So that will give us the event reporting module complete, and that ability to extract information from it for our reporting outwards. The development piece in relation to the fuller management system is in relation to the modules that are going to support that. So we have within Safety and Assurance developed the requirements for each of those modules so far. So I think there's 6 waiting in the wings for development by IT, and that's perhaps where the slippage has occurred so far. So I still expect to have a DSE module published and available very quickly. That will be the first one, followed by the risk assessment one. But there'll be a decision as to, how much further we develop that system, and whether there's any viable alternatives to us. But there is some progress, which I'm pleased to report on, but there are still significant challenges in terms of the initial timescales allocated to this project, which are seeing some slippage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Unless there are any other questions, just an observation, I suppose, from me, that I'm conscious, and I'm using that word deliberately, not concerned, conscious that the risk level is on average reasonably high at the moment. I think we've explained right the way throughout the meeting the pressures, etc., that people are experiencing, but I guess what would be nice to see, as I'm sure you would agree, is to start seeing some of that risk level start to trending down. But I'm deliberately using the phrase conscious. Andy?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it probably just brings back to Scott's point round about that almost slight lag in terms of the risk register coming to the committee, and part of Bruce's update. So, and I know it's the same for service delivery, that things shift by the time it comes to the committee. So just to give you a little bit of reassurance that some of the stuff that Bruce has highlighted there in terms of some of the positive work we're doing to try and create capacity and be more efficient within training, that will hopefully build a bit of momentum and bring that forward, so that we're starting to see that mitigate some of that risk.
Thank you for that, Andy. It's always reassuring to know that we're starting to see things progressing. Okay, well, thank you. Putting that together can't be easy, ladies and gentlemen, so I really do appreciate that. Thank you. If we can, though, we'll move on to our second item. So we asked for a spotlight report around the challenges that relate to RVS, I suppose, RVDS as well. So can I hand over to Stuart, who's going to introduce his paper?
Thank you, Chair. So this spotlight relates to 2 committee-aligned risks. One's service delivery risk 6, which relates to the level of capacity and resource within service delivery. And another one is around about a pod director at risk, which relates to workforce planning and recruitment. And there's elements of training that cut across both those risks. So essentially myself, Liz and Andy will probably all contribute to this item. Just to pick up your point, I think you've picked up this already, Chair, around about the nomenclature. So RVDS we now refer to as on-call. The 2 terms are synonymous, but on-call is the more modern nomenclature for RVDS, and it aligns with the NFCC as well. There was also a desire from our on-call staff to move to this term, and I was obviously very supportive of that. So the attached briefing provides merely a snapshot of what's quite a significant amount of work that's been done across the service at the moment. And there's an absolute strategic commitment to making meaningful improvements to the on-call duty system. In terms of the background, I think we're all aware of the ongoing challenges with on-call recruitment and retention. And this is an issue that all UK fire and rescue services, indeed worldwide fire and rescue services, are grappling with. We've carried out a great deal of benchmarking with other services, and the challenges that they face are pretty much replicated within SFRS. Clearly, the geography of Scotland presents an even more unique and challenging situation, given the number of remote rural areas that we have, and indeed the number of island communities that we serve. There's a number of societal factors that are potentially amplifying the challenges with the RVDS, impact of COVID, EU exit, and indeed the cost of living crisis are all having an impact on the sustainability of the RVDS. I think Steve's picked up this point already, and it's within this report as well, around about the number of RVDS or on-call vacancies that we currently carry. And just to highlight, this is based on legacy target operating models. SFRS as yet don't have a standard station establishment figure for RVDS or on-call, or a standard target operating model. That's part of the work of the on-call programme. So these numbers perhaps look slightly starker than what the reality actually is. However, it does remain quite a significant concern. I'll cover that in a bit more detail later. You'll probably be aware that RVDS availability is particularly challenging during weekday daytime periods, and this reaffirms the need to be much more flexible in our contractual arrangements and the need to do more to attract and recruit those who might be present within communities during these times. So just in terms to kind of cover some of the stuff that we're doing to mitigate the risk, as I said, this briefing only sets out a snapshot of some of the work that we're doing. The main area of mitigation is the delivery of a major strategic programme of work. That includes several projects designed to improve attraction, recruitment and retention of on-call staff. And this is a major programme. It's reported and monitored through the Change Committee. And just to cover a few areas of focus for that, the first is variable contract options and remuneration. So essentially making it more attractive package to a broader range of potential firefighters, less reliance on operational demand being linked to pay, and essentially a more holistic salary scheme which includes pay for prevention activity, broader local resilience work, etc., all built into the pay. The work on station establishments I've already talked about in terms of agreeing a standard approach to station establishments, but as part of that, giving local managers more control over what that looks and feels like, so it reflects the local need and it's more reflective of the local communities. There's some work in terms of responding options, so that's essentially around about strategic clustering of stations. So I think we accept that we'll never have 100% of our stations available all the time, so we can be more strategic in terms of what stations we focus on to make sure that they're available. And building into that is more dynamic responding and mobilisation times to improve availability. So instead of an arbitrary time period to respond, extending that in some areas where we know by increasing it by 2 or 3 minutes, you can quite substantially increase the number of people who can respond. So that more dynamic work, and that ties in with the work that the SDNP team are doing at the moment. We're trialling that in some areas at the moment, and we're seeing some real benefits to that already coming through. The relationship between the various duty systems within the service and improving the connectivity between the duty systems. So that includes that work we talked about before in terms of migration from on-call to whole time, improving resilience and availability by utilising both staff groups more intelligently and collectively together to make it more effective. And then attraction and recruitment improvement. So how do we improve the candidate experience, speed up the time from application to the point of being operational, push more responsibility to the local areas in terms of administering, delivering recruitment, selection and training processes. And I think Bruce has already touched on that in terms of pushing training to point of need. And that's where we really need to get to, recruiting and training at point of need. That removes a number of issues, primarily around about the need for candidates to travel and what can be quite considerable distances and over-reliance on national resources, both from Lizzie's team and Andy's team. So that programme of work is scheduled to complete in June 23. However, as Lindsay's already pointed out, many elements of this have been expedited through the staff and tag set up in response to the pension remedy work. Some early outcomes of the other pieces of work, so the pre-recruitment and engagement programme, it was formerly known as PEEP, now called PrEP. I think we missed the trick in the first time round. It's working extremely well. The conversion rate for applicants first applying to actually being recruited was sub 20% before. We're now into the high 20%, which is, indicates quite a quick turnaround in terms of that. And that's a combination of good comms and engagement, pre-fitness test advice being given to candidates being able to attend stations before they actually go through the recruitment process in order to understand the full ask of the service to make sure that it's a fit for them. It's been really successful so far, and I always use the example of Benbecula. So Benbecula for a number of years had no applicants, And following running the prep process, we had more than 10 applicants in the first round, and that's now been replicated elsewhere in Scotland, so it's beginning to bear fruit. The new recruitment toolkit and resources are now live and working well, and we've seen a marked increase in the number of people applying in some areas. And what's been really good about this is a lot of that has been developed at a local level, captured and then rolled out nationally, and I think that's really important. We're also seeing the impact of some high-profile campaigns which we've been run and media campaigns. What's particularly pleasing is on the back of the two media pieces, one around about Campbelltown and one around about Invergordon, we've seen an increase in the number of females applying in some areas as well, so that's having a real positive impact. We're also seeing the youth volunteer scheme generating a natural pathway into the RVDS in the whole time. And as I said before, we do see the youth volunteer scheme as a measure to, or an initiative which will support recruitment, but also help with diversity and inclusion. And just an example of that, 3 of the 5 female firefighters at Campbelltown RDS, they actually came through the youth volunteer scheme at Campbelltown as well. So we're beginning to see that bear fruit as well. And we've now got 14 youth volunteer schemes up and running, with some more to follow over the next year as well. In terms of training, and Andy might want to expand on this point, but the focus is maximising the training time that's available for on-call firefighters. We've increased the time available for training nights to 3 hours across the board in some areas, but it was still 2 hours previously. And we're also making training more reflective of the time that on-call firefighters actually have available to train. So essentially focusing more on those core and safety critical skills. But as I say, Andy can come in and add any detail on that. I guess in terms of our biggest challenges at the moment, the ongoing RVDS T's and C's negotiations, that is preventing us from having a harmonised set of T's and C's from which we can then implement initiatives and policies that will make the RVDS more attractive and sustainable. And the obvious one from that is flexible contracts. And I guess the other challenge to highlight is the ongoing societal change and population migration that we're seeing across Scotland. There may be an opportunity within that post-COVID, more people working from home, more people moving to rural communities, and we need to make sure that we can tap into that. And I guess the final point I'll just make before I pass back to you, Chair, is I just want to add that whilst we're focused here on the number of the risks and the challenges associated with the RVDS, it's always important to recognise and highlight the value that our on-call firefighter colleagues add to the service and the communities they serve. The commitment of the crews is nothing short of extraordinary, and we routinely see colleagues go above and beyond in these areas. In many places, the fire station is absolutely the heart of the community. And we saw with the COVID period and the recent storms in the north, the contribution that they readily made to wider local resilience issues and outcomes. Humanitarian aids, hubs, testing pathways are the prime examples of that as well. So I'll pause at that, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stuart. And I assure you, being as somebody who would only be responded to by an on-call service, I'm more than well aware of them. And I grew up watching them run past us on the high street to the station when they needed to. So I think we can never underestimate the value of those individuals who support our remote and rural communities in the way that they do. Are there any questions or queries in relation to anything that Stuart has raised? Steve?
Thank you, Mary. No, I don't have queries or questions, but I would like to take the opportunity to commend Stuart and the team for this report and for the content. It's really encouraging for a board member to hear about this excellent work, and thank you for bringing it to us.
Thanks, Steve. Anyone else? In which case, just a couple of their observations, Stuart, they don't really need responded to. I do think it's interesting. I have to be really conscious that I don't have a conscious or subconscious bias on this one, but I do think it's really interesting that we do see women coming forward within the Highland area and in Argyll, and I think there's something about maybe there's a cultural shift that's allowing that to happen. I don't know, but there certainly feels as though there's lessons that could be learned in that area. I don't know, but it's encouraging. And certainly the youth voluntary work is also encouraging. In fact, there was a lot of things that you were talking about and that we've talked about earlier in the meeting that I think I take a lot of assurance from. I guess ultimately the question that I would put is, when will this bring sufficient fruit to some extent that we could be in a more optimistic position to start to potentially see some changes coming? And there's a wee bit within that that also makes me think, when will we have, or should we have, an SFRS specific, I think you described it as a standard station establishment. When will we have that for ourselves, and will that make a difference in terms of understanding the issue that we're trying to sort of quantify to some extent?
So in terms of that second point, the work for the programme is due to complete in 2023. I can't remember the timeline, the milestone for that actual station specific establishment work, but it should be completed by June 23. Mary, and I think that point on the station establishments is really, really important, because we have to get that harmonised approach, and there's lots you can do within the station establishments to acknowledge the fact that some people are only available in certain times and stuff like that. So that unlocks that part as well. In terms of when we'll see the impact of this, we are seeing impacts already, but some of it might be longer term. And I think we have to accept that a lot of this might be slightly longer term. And in the interim, we just need to make sure that we continue to progress and give this the focus that is due. And I'm very assured by the focus of the LSOs, particularly those remote rural areas, are giving to this matter. And as I said before, they're the ones that are driving a lot of this work now through really good initiatives that are working really well. So you touched about Argyll and Bute. Some of the work in Argyll and Bute has been exceptional over the last year, and they're really demonstrating what can be done. That, if possible, is if you empower them and push it to local needs, we can see quite a quick impact. So their stats in terms of number of applicants, number of females and stuff is increased hugely. So I guess I'm probably not answering the question in terms of when we'll see that, but it's probably quite a hard question to answer at the moment, Mary.
I think it probably is, in all fairness, and I'm kind of putting you a wee bit on the spot there, Stuart, to be honest. But I guess what I'm taking, and I hope I haven't taken it incorrectly, is that you are optimistic about the trajectory in terms of where we're going.
I'm very optimistic in terms of the focus that's been given in it, and I say this at the programme board that I chair, that I'm very, I keep saying, using this term today, enthused by the passion and the desire for the service to actually, for once, get on top of this issue and really make it sustainable going forward. So I think we're in the best place that we've been with this, and we just need to continue in that trajectory to make sure that we can achieve what it is we're setting out to achieve by this.
Thank you for that, Stuart. I don't know if anybody else has anything else that they want to add. Fiona, I don't know if there's anything from a change committee perspective that you want to highlight. No? Okay. Excellent. In which case, just to say thank you very much for that, Stuart. And, enthused is the right word. And I'm genuinely conscious of the fact that it isn't our VDS or non-call system that would support me if ever I have an accident. So I'm keen to make sure that we've got a robust service as much as we possibly can. I'm motivated, you might say. So if there's anything at all that we can do as a board, please let us know.
Thank you.
Okay, if we can then move on to partnership working, and then can I also just note with everybody that item 15 is reports for information only, so I'm conscious that we will be potentially a bit tighter for time, so if there are any questions or queries, if we can focus those, that would be useful. But in the interim, if we can go to partnership working and to Steve for the EPF update.
Thank you, Mary. I'll try and keep it brief. So the Employee Partnership Forum took place on the 19th of May. That was the first meeting in the refreshed style. We had a really good balanced attendance from all levels of management, good support from HR, and excellent contributions from the representative bodies. The agenda had the new refreshed style, in which we had it split into two. So the first section was about a discussion topic. This time it was gender diversity and inclusion in Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. And the second half of the agenda was for routine business, mainly HR and OD papers. Sometimes there will be escalation issues on the agenda, but there were none this time. So we tackled gender diversity and inclusion, and I asked Elaine Gerard, the HROD manager, to give us an introduction to that and to challenge us on it, and she did an excellent job. Thanks to her. As a result of everyone being in the right frame of mind, I think we had some really excellent discussions. There were good insights, there was real honesty, there was a clear commitment to do better. The discussions were collaborative. There were several occasions where it would have been impossible to tell whether or not the speaker was a representative from management or from staff. None of it was defensive. There was acceptance of the challenge and acceptance of the need to improve, and I hope that everyone felt that the discussion was inclusive. Certainly everyone who indicated that they want to talk got the opportunity. Now, given that we were opening it up for a discussion of an hour, Elaine and I had got ready to ask some prompt questions to keep the discussion going if necessary, and I can tell you, colleagues, that wasn't necessary. Indeed, the discussion overran and I had to cut short the second half of the agenda, which in itself was disappointing but was reassuring. Now, I want to give you some highlights of the flavour of the discussion, and what I think I have to do for you here is to make sure I get the balance right, which is that the process, the meeting, was very positive, but the content, the conclusions drawn from the meeting, is very challenging. So I'm going to be positive because that's my nature, but you know, there are challenging issues here which are raised, and we can't afford to hide from them. So I'm going to bring out one or two comments from my notes. Firstly, a recognition that diverse organisations are stronger, and that's why we need to make the organisation more diverse. It was agreed that we are unique, so we can't just expect to go out and learn from other organisations, because there are none that are the same as us, and all of our issues are unique. Many of our issues are unique. There was agreement that leadership is key, and that leadership applies at all levels, whether it's chief officer or representative bodies. There's leadership to be applied at all levels, and that's important in this arena. We noted a lack of female role models and an image issue, which leave new recruits to the service struggling to see the role model that they might aspire to emulate. There was clarity that some of the language that we use and the nomenclature that we use is a barrier in itself, and that sometimes people don't really realise it. Lindsay made the comment that the word firefighter is in itself potentially a term that people perceive to be about masculinity, and that these sorts of unconscious barriers are important. We noted that not only is recruitment of more female firefighters important, but that retention of them is potentially just as important, sometimes more important, and that there's a difference between image and reality. A couple of the speakers noted, and this was on both sides of the attendance list, that we feel that we may even have regressed rather than progressed over the last few years in terms of gender diversity and inclusion within the service. There was a realism about the facilities, and Ian Morris was very helpful in pointing out that some of our facilities are just not capable of conversion or improvement to the point that we would like. And there was a really important contribution, which was about feeling safe. There was a challenge, do female employees of Scottish Fire and Rescue Service feel safe at work? And the answer to that I really liked was, unless we can say clearly yes to that question about feeling safe, then the answer is no. Until we can say yes, that everyone feels safe working for Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, there remains a no answer there. So we concluded, as a result of what was an excellent discussion, that we haven't fixed anything in the discussion, but what we did do was improve understanding, and we built a motivation to address the issues. And to that end, I proposed the establishment of a short life working group, which I'm going to talk about in a second. I was encouraged by the discussion, greatly encouraged, and I would like to say how positive I feel about the fact that the Employee Partnership Forum is collaborative, inclusive and honest. And all of that is true. However, what it did was expose a huge challenge for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, which I believe this committee and the board need to raise in our list of priorities to be tackled. Now, the Short Life Working Group is my way of, or our way of, getting to the point where we can translate the excellent discussion into some recommendations for the board to consider, because the forum itself has no decision-making power. Only the board can act on the recommendations that might come forward. And I'm delighted that Elaine Gerard has agreed to lead a Short Life Working Group. The intention is that it meet 3 times, one to first meeting to highlight the evidence that they might need. Excuse me, I've got something just flash up on screen there. The second one to consider that evidence, and the third meeting to consider recommendations to take forward for this committee and for the board. So genuinely 3 meetings over 3 months, short life, short and sharp. None of this knocking something into the long grass for discussion. What we want are results to come forward from this. And I'm pleased to say that we've nearly got our attendance list on the Short Life Working Group agreed. Again, Elaine's been very helpful in that. It'd be about 6 people. It'd be balanced in terms of gender, balanced in terms of representation. And we can expect to see results from that in about 3 months. Very well, very happy to take questions. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Steve. It was a very good discussion, actually. It was it's interesting to be part of. Any questions, queries? In which case, Steve, I think we're just wishing you well. Thank you very much. If we can move on then to the PAG update. I think it hasn't met though, Lindsay, am I correct?
Yes, so almost certainly a very quick update. There were no items put forward for the agenda by any members of the Partnership Advisory Group, so everybody agreed to stand the meeting down. So unless there are any questions about that decision, I don't have any further update to share on that.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm assuming there are no questions around that. Excellent. Right, if we can, we'll move on to agenda item 15 then. Very, very conscious that at the end of the day, it's me who's probably asked all of the questions, so I will be conscious of being more focused. And if we can start that off by the Leadership and Change Programme update. And I think Kerry is hopefully here with us and she's going to take this item.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, good afternoon, committee. Thank you for inviting me along this afternoon. What I propose to do is give you a very, very brief overview of the paper and then invite any questions if that's working for everybody. My team are actually delivering a workshop today, so the pleasure falls to me to provide the overview for you. So with the Leadership for Change paper, this update's being brought forward to the committee just to provide an update on the implementation of our first virtual delivery of that programme. The purpose of the programme is to build leadership capacity and strengthen change capability at all levels in the organisation, which links really nicely to our previous update there from the EPF gender diversity piece. We had 24 participants partake in the first Virtual Leadership for Change programme. It ran from November 21 through to the end of March 22. From our initial evaluation, you'll see that 86.4% said that the programme was very good and the remaining 13.6% said it was good. So I guess to give the committee a little assurance, we will be doing some follow-up evaluation with both line managers and the delegates themselves in the coming weeks and into early Q2, just to actually fully capture what did you learn and how is that being applied and adding value in the workplace. The feedback itself, there's a couple of points I'd like to pull out. So one, there's still a desire to return to the classroom and real live face-to-face delivery. So what we're doing at the moment is actually revamping the programme again and putting a wee bit more structure around that online delivery because we're keen to actually leverage the benefits that our digital first and virtual delivery brings both the delegates and us as an organisation, and they're listed in the paper. And we're also looking to bolster that structure with pulling in some fixed cohorts so that even if people are called away, if we're looking at the impact of things like our pension remedy, we're looking to deliver this in short, sharp sessions as before, but in fixed cohorts so that people can build that peer learning network and support around them. So by recording every session, should any of our colleagues be called away, whether it be a personal matter or out in a shout on a work-based matter, they can actually pick up the recording of the session with their own delegate group, and then in some action learning sets in the near future from those events can actually get caught up themselves. We will be progressing that delivery from early in Q2 for the next cohort in this restructured programme. We'll be taking nominations from those already supplied through our annual learning needs analysis process and validating those with our learning partners in each of the functions through our learning partner group that meet on a regular basis. So it was just to provide the committee with the update around the good first delivery and some changes to the second cohort delivery. I'm happy to invite any questions.
Thank you, Kerry. It was very interesting. Very interesting training as well. That would have been Great, Andy signed up in the jot. Steve.
I'd be interested, Kerry, to hear about the makeup of the trainers, and the core of my question really is to seek reassurance that the leadership insights are being provided from a broad range of perspectives, not just from within the organisation.
Absolutely. So the programme content itself is actually supplied by a company called Franklin Covey, who you may have heard of, who do programmes like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Speed of Trust programmes. So they are indeed thought leaders in the realm of leadership across the world. So it's very diverse leadership content that's coming to the organisation, but we're bringing that flavour of translating it, if you like, and bringing it to life from within the service as well. So best of both worlds, I believe there, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. I love the speed of trust. Yeah, what it says about me. Okay, if there's no other questions, then Kerry, we're going to stay with yourself and we're going to move on to the graduate programme update.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Chair. So again, I'll provide a brief overview and then open up for questions. So again, this programme's bringing forward an update on the first year or so of our graduate programme. We currently have 2 graduates on a pilot with us, a 3-year pilot, working through their specialism within POD itself. And this programme, this paper brings forward some feedback and learning from the graduates themselves, from the rotation managers who are supporting them through the rotations of the programme, and also some of the improvements that we've already made. So I think for me, some of the points to pull out are that I guess we're adapting to the current climate. So our plans were to next move on and diversify the programme over the next few years into wider support programmes, and we will look to do that. But I think there's also a need for us to look at the operational graduate type programme or fast track into management, looking at the impact of the pension remedy at the moment. So we'll look to see if we can dual run those 2 developments moving forward. Hopefully you'll see from the paper itself that we've been making continuous improvements as we've been going along, and some of the even better ifs, we're already building things like a delegate and manager's handbook to supplement the face-to-face sessions that we provided for both the delegates themselves or the graduates themselves and the rotation managers. We have mentors in place through managers within POD and the senior management team as well. So we've been making those iterative improvements. What we're about to do now is we're making plans with the heads of function across the service and looking at some both internal and external considerations about where we take the next iteration of our undergraduate and graduate programmes. So we're looking at some of those harder to fill roles and skill gaps that we have in the organisation, as well as our demographics and the pension remedy. We're also taking into cognizance, whilst the paper was originally signed off for the roles to be supernumerary, considering the context of the recent Scottish Government spending review, and we'll start to explore roles that maybe are already attributed with market allowance, and the opportunity to create wider development roles within our existing establishment as well. So we're looking, I guess, to push the envelope and thinking around how we can further diversify these programmes moving forward. On that note, my proposal would be that when we've had those meetings over the coming weeks and months, that we would bring back a forward paper through governance to let you know what our future plans would be and how we're going to take that paper forward. So again, I just ask the committee to recognise the feedback in the programme and the changes that we've made to date, and where we're looking to take the programme moving forward, and invite any questions.
Thank you, Kerry. Steve?
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Kerry, for a good, concise introduction. So I'm cognizant of the fact that this paper is for information, so I'm not going to ask lots of questions or elongate the discussion here, but I do want to say that I thought there was more to it than 2 people. I do want to say that I thought there was more to it in terms of an understanding of what the graduate programme might achieve for the organisation. And my thoughts are that when you come back to the committee with proposals, or at least the next development, that what we as board members want to hear is about the strategic intent of the graduate programme, what it is we want to achieve in terms of diversity, perspective, skills, breadth, challenge to the perceived norms of the organisation, changes, improvements to the culture of the organisation. These are things that a graduate programme can bring if it's well designed and if it's properly resourced. And as a result of that, I think that we as a board and as a people committee ought to be taking a role in hearing from you what it is the graduate programme can do for the organisation, rather than for a very small toe in the water learning exercise with two people. I was hoping there was more to it, and I would like to see more to it. I am aware of other organisations where the graduate programme has made a big difference to how they approach their management task and how the culture of the organisation is more reflective of the rest of the society that it works in. Sorry to be a little bit challenging, but I think that's a discussion perhaps for another time, Mary.
Yeah, well, I think in all fairness, it's an invitation really to come back potentially with the answers that Kerry's indicating we have. I did express some surprise that it was only two, if I'm honest as well, but I think if we can take assurance to some extent that there's a commitment to grow and to develop this into a strategic approach, then that would certainly be encouraging to come back with, Kerry. The only thing I would add on to that, if that's possible, is I think it would be really interesting to see how we can use a graduate programme for approaching and tackling diversity issues and for approaching different types of candidates. But I would just throw a word of caution in there too, to make sure that we don't, in our enthusiasm, potentially forget the place of mature students as well within that, who bring with them a variety of other experiences that also bring value too. But you'll know all of this already, Kerry, I suspect. Kerry, do you want to come back on any of those points?
I'd like to, yes. I see Liz has her hand up as well. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll jump back in. So, Steve, I agree with all of the points that you've made, and many of those were addressed within the original paper that we brought forward around the suite of the development for the undergraduate and graduate scheme in itself. So when we brought that forward a year and a bit ago, it outlined some of those. So what I'd like to do, Steve, is I'd be delighted to take an action to maybe recirculate that original paper to the board members on the committee here, appreciating that we've had some recent changes within the board, and I would be delighted to accept the opportunity to come back and actually broaden those back out with our future plans as well. So yes, the programme was intended and is intended to bring all of those things as well, and I'll circulate the original paper to provide some comfort on that.
That would be fantastic. Thank you, Kerry.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you for that. If there's no more questions. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, committee.
We will move on then to item 15.3, which is the bullying, harassment and discrimination project update and policy review, and I think that's Ros.
Afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
So the paper today has been brought for information only, so I will try and keep my update very brief. So revised dignity and respect policy and accompanying procedure went live at the end of February. This was following approval by SLT in November. And to date, both have been very well received. Key changes have been that the policy and procedure were developed to have greater emphasis on the positive behaviours SFRS expect from employees. We also moved away from the 3 original routes that a complaint of bullying, harassment or discrimination could be addressed to one informal route. This has streamlined the process, and if a complaint is not resolved using this approach, then the formal grievance or disciplinary procedures may be utilised. Following staff engagement sessions and feedback received from those, we have introduced a network of 15 trained contact advisors. This is a positive step for the service and provides an additional support for employees to discuss concerns in a confidential and impartial way. I am aware that the contact advisors have been utilised in a limited capacity to date, so we have further regular communications planned to further promote the role and increase awareness, but all information is available on iHub. A dedicated toolkit, a dedicated toolkit and a review of other training elements are also still under review to ensure professional behaviours and equality themes are mainstreamed throughout. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Liz. I think the report was very comprehensive and the updated policies is always welcome as well. Are there any questions or queries? Thank you very much. That was really a process.
Thank you.
Cheers. And then we're on to 15.4, which is the statutory health and medical surveillance. And Justin, I believe, is taking us through this one.
I am, yes. Good afternoon. My name's Justin Smithson. I'm the clinical lead, and I'm here just to briefly take you through the statutory health surveillance paper. Excuse me, give you a brief overview. So this paper is for information only for the committee, and you just asked to note the recommendations contained within the paper as these have been approved in principle by the SLT. So basically, where we find ourselves is protracted discussions between the SFRS and the HSE means that the SFRS are currently not compliant with the CAR 12 regulations around the management of asbestos in the workplace, as firefighters are classified as licensed workers under these regulations. Where we want to be is we as an organisation need to be compliant with the CAR 12 regulations as it's a legal requirement. And we aim to do this through a rolling surveillance programme carried out by HSE appointed doctors. And how we're going to get there is engagements taking place between relevant stakeholders, legal and safety assurance colleagues, and which has resulted basically in the outcome of which informing the prioritization of certain staff groups as we roll this program out. And those staff groups are like fire investigation staff and USAR and ISR teams. And it's my intention to start rolling out this this process the next quarter, and I plan to start with the fire investigation team. It was noted that in the paper presented to the committee that there was no financial information. That was all withheld. The reason being for this was simply because there are so many variables to this and so many costings that at the moment we haven't been able to finalize exact costings, but I'm more than happy to come back to the committee once we've been able to finalize these costings with that information. And if I welcome any questions from the committee at this point in time.
Thank you, Justin. I think from my side of things, if we can have a circulation of the costings once you have them, I don't think it needs to come back to the full committee.
Okay.
It just if everybody else is content with that, it was just because of the rationale behind the decision is better supported.
Yeah.
And easier to note from my side of things if it's in there. I don't know if anybody else disagrees or agrees with that though. Is that fine? Are there any questions or queries for Justin? Malcolm.
Sorry, just happy to agree with that. Yeah, I suppose I don't know if it almost comes into tender type stuff of things. Is any of that confidential? We, at the moment we're in a public meeting. If we're distributing that, is that privately or publicly? It was just to clarify.
No. Absolutely, Malcolm. There could have been some conflict of interests at this stage, hence they've been anonymised at this point in time. But I will, as Mari says, I will absolutely circulate that to board members once this has been finalised and things are in place and confirmed.
Thank you, Justin. I don't think there are any other questions or queries. So thank you for that and good luck with that.
Thank you very much, team. Thank you very much, committee. Thank you again. Bye-bye. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, in which case we moved on to item 16, which is the forward planning, and we've got the pod policy review, and that's with Mary.
I don't think Mary has joined. Oh, there she is.
Sorry. I probably jumped the gun on that one, considering how long it's taken me to get through every other agenda item with all my questions, Mary. Sorry. So we're on item 16 and with yourself, Mary.
Thank you, Chair. So the report today is presented to the committee for information, and it's the quarterly pod policy review schedule. If I can refer you to section 3.1 of the report. The policy schedule is as of the 31st of March, and that's attached, that appendix 1 for your information. And as usual, it's been devised taking into account the Directorate Plan for Pods, our priorities for 2022, a focus on our essential policies and any stakeholder engagement that is required moving forward. But more importantly, going forward, it's also now taking into account the work that we have to do around pensions remedy and PTFES work within the Directorate. If I can refer you to section 3.2 of the report, so during Q4, we published the dignity and respect policy and the pre-placement policy. To support our dignity and respect policy, we have 8 contact advisors in place within the service, and that's a mix of all our employee groups, uniform, support and control staff. And the role of the contact advisor is pretty much to offer confidential support for staff who feel they have experienced or have been accused of discrimination or bullying and harassment. And they also will be able to recognise how to signpost any staff to other sources of specialist support in case they need that. During this Q4, we also issued the recognition of prior learning policy for its first consultation, and this policy really recognises the fact that our people have gained a lot of valuable knowledge and skills, etc., either during the service or as they joined the service. And if this is the case, we will engage with the relevant awarding bodies, and each application would be considered on its own merit. The policy is relevant to those who are new to the service, but it will also support existing employees who want to progress their careers within the organisation. The Working Together framework, you'll probably be aware, returned to SLT in March for further engagement, and we have been engaging again with the Fire Brigade Union, and further additional text has been passed on to them, and we await their feedback on that. I believe today the statutory health and medical health surveillance policy is being presented to People Committee, so I won't say too much on that because I believe that's on your agenda for today. The piece of work that we've been carrying out around our pod policies for 2022 has been concluded, and that is attached to Appendix 1. So at the minute we're looking at probably a dozen policies we will review this year, but we'll keep that flexible in our timelines, again due to the priorities that I mentioned earlier. Some of these policies have already been updated and they can be removed from the list. So we have updated our support staff handbook to take into account the new information around pay and reward, the support staff flexi-time scheme and the whole time day duty working hours policy, sorry that's a bit of a mouthful, has also been issued for consultation, and our reservists and death in service policy is now under review. And in order to support the review, we are also considering shorter consultation periods where appropriate. So at the minute our documents go out for consultation for 3 weeks first of all, and then 2 weeks, but we're looking to reduce that to 2 weeks and then 1 week, subject to the amount of change that's required in the policy. If we look ahead to Q1, where we are at the minute, almost at the end of Q1, we are looking to issue the Managing Employee Performance Policy and the Secondary Employment Policy for consultation. You'll be aware that we published or launched our Employee Recognition Scheme in April this year, and the latest update on that is the nominations closed on the 16th of May. We received 81 nominations, and at the minute the panel are reviewing those nominations to determine who will either receive a thank you card or a voucher, and that information will be issued in the coming weeks. And our comms team within the service are also going to be publishing some spotlight stories on some of our most significant nominations. That's all I had to say in the report, Chair. I hope that was a minute. Apologies if I went over a time, and I'm happy to take any comments or questions on that.
Thank you, Mary, and that's particularly encouraging about the nominations as well. Well done to everybody with that. Are there any comments or questions for Mary? Okay, that's a sign, Mary, that I'm running behind as a chair, so it's absolutely a reflection on everything you've said. But thank you for that. That was very comprehensive and much appreciated.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. We're on 16.2 then, and that's the health and safety policy management arrangements, and that's with yourself, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the attached cover paper and the forward plan schedule is for information for the committee. The headline within the cover paper really is that all of the management arrangements that were identified to be developed and published have been completed in the past year. And the briefing paper, cover paper also sets out the kind of criteria for the review processes that we would implement that review out with the agreed timelines, and I'm happy to any questions.
Thank you for that, Andy. Are there any questions or queries? Is everybody content? Yes, excellent. Thank you, Andy. That was appreciated. Okay, in which case we are now on to the committee forward plan, and that is attached. Are there any questions or queries about that item? I'll take that as a no. In which case it's fine as it stands. And the items for consideration for future in relation to the integrated governance forum or the board or the strategy day meetings, are there any items that anybody wishes to raise? Can I just propose potentially that if we're looking at a spotlight in the future, there does seem to me to potentially be a theme throughout some of the areas of the assurance reporting, that it would be interesting to explore the support mechanisms that are being put in place around the operational team. But I'm happy to discuss that potentially off the table unless anybody has any immediate objections to a potential similar input to Stuart's today around operational control. Okay, we can explore that a little bit more. In which case, a review of the actions, Ali, and I think it's over to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Ali Cameron, Board Support Manager. So in relation to today's meeting, we picked up potential 3 actions, which just to confirm with yourself as Chair and Committee. The first one relating to item 9, and just for the People Organisational Development Director to provide a greater insight and circulate via email regarding the attrition rate and outside retirement and risk associated, for example, with operations control, but not limited to that, together with any impact to recruitment and retention. And that's against Lindsay Gaia. And the next action, if you wish it to be an action, is item 15.2 in relation to that and the circulation or recirculation of the graduation scheme paper previously submitted to the committee.
Yes, please.
And that's against Kerry Dodd. And then the final action being 15.3 linked to the health and surveillance paper, circulation of the costings once appropriate to do so. And that's against Justin Smithson.
Yeah, 15.4, Ali, yes.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Chair.
Paul.
Forgive me, Chair, this should have been under the rolling forward plan. I just wondered, I can't see it there, but Andy gave a commitment, I think, to bring the health and safety annual report to a particular meeting. I don't think that's an action for this meeting, but could I have it on the rolling forward plan?
Yes, I think what we need to do is allow Andy the opportunity to catch up with Jim about our earlier conversation about the autumn time and make sure that's feasible. But once that's done, Paul, we'll need to get that reflected in the forward plan.
I'm aware that the autumn meeting is, I think, 5th September, which is quite early for the autumn, 5 days into it. I'm not really bothered if it's the 5th of September or a later one, but I'd like to have it included into the programme, that's all.
Yes, it might very well be that it's a later meeting this year, but with an aspiration that it is the autumn meeting next year. But taking Paul's point that we'll get that added to the forward plan then, if that's okay, Ali and Andy.
Yeah, we'll add that to the forward plan and just put a note next to it just to be confirmed.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other points? Would those of you who are moving on to the private session like a 5-minute break before we do so? I would expect that would be the case. If everybody can be back then about 2 minutes to 1,